Ina mana, ina reo, ina hoe wha tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good evening everyone, my name's Anne Tolley and I'm the chair of the New Zealand chapter of Transparency International. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here tonight. It's so nice to see so many people coming to an AGM. So, can I first of all acknowledge Gibson Sheet, the Wellington Club and our panellists who are with us tonight. Can I acknowledge John Ryan? I've lost him in the room, who's our new patron. Welcome, John. Oh, and as long as the members approve, I think we've got to put a resolution, but thank you very much. Can I acknowledge Sir Anand Satyanan, who's with us tonight, Dame Suzanne Snively, who's a life member of TINZ, Lynn Provost. I saw Lynn come in somewhere, yes, there she is. And Stephanie Hopkins, who's also another life member, and Brendan Wilson. So great to have you with us tonight. Thank you. Murray Petrie, another one. Thank you. Oh, there we are. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to our very capable Deputy Chair, Debbie G, and she's going to introduce to you the panellists, and then we'll get underway with the panel. But thank you so much. Lovely to see you all with us today.
All right. Whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi akiranta te kura, hei tio, hei huka, hei hauhunga, ti hei Māori ora. Ngā mihi mahana kia koutou. As Anne said, I'm Debbie G, I'm the Deputy Chair of Transparency International New Zealand. And welcome to those in the room and those joining us online. And welcome and a huge thanks to our panellists. In order, Karen Chang, Director of the Serious Fraud Office, Andrew Kibblewhite, Secretary of Justice, and Philippa Yasbek, who is a member of the Transparency International New Zealand Board and is here to speak about issues representing civil society. We are remarkably still expecting Richard Chambers to join us. He's been unavoidably detained by a checkpoint interview, subject to which I can't imagine, but he will be joining us. So I think that's a real credit to him that he's actually making the time to do that in this current environment for him. So we'll start the panel without him. What we're going to do is, first of all, to note this session is being recorded and it will be posted on the Transparency International New Zealand YouTube channel. And also note the questions we're going to ask today will focus on policy, not on politics. And that's reflective of Transparency International New Zealand's values of integrity, courage, transparency and respect. So there will be a section later where you get an opportunity to ask some questions from those present in the room, regrettably not those online. So please bear those values and that approach in mind when asking your questions. First, I'm going to ask each of our panellists some initial questions related to their specific areas of responsibility and expertise. They'll provide with no more than 5-minute answers, making a total of 40 minutes. After that, we will open the floor for questions from, as I say, those present in the room, and we'll have about a further 20 minutes for that. When that's finished, we will have a further 10 minutes for each of the panellists to wrap up, and we need to conclude this session by 6:15, in which case we'll have some further time for mingling and socialising before we start the AGM. So without further ado, I'm going to start with the first question, which I'll address to Andrew Kibblewhite. The global mechanisms that support greater integrity and accountability, in particular the Financial Action Task Force and the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, have been positive in many respects, but they do show areas for improvement. what policy responses are needed before our next assessment to ensure that New Zealand can maintain its standing as a country that is actively preventing and detecting corruption?
Kia ora, Debbie, and tēnā tātou katoa. I'll answer the question. I might just preface it with just a little comment really about how important this subject is and how it sits and fits with me in my role as Secretary for Justice. So we have in the Ministry of Justice a purpose statement which is strengthening public trust in the law. And if you're talking about strengthening public trust in the law, you're actually talking about a whole lot of what happens, not just in the justice system, but across the institutes of government and Parliament. It goes to the quality of our policy advice, the clarity of legislation in the House, the timeliness of the courts. It goes to matters of integrity across agencies, and it goes to the business of today. What are we doing in the context of combating corruption, combating financial crime, and the like? So this is this goes to one of it's a touchstone area, touchstone issue for us in the Ministry of Justice. The question is particularly around the sort of work of FATF and UNCAC, the Financial Action Task Force, and the Convention Against Corruption. We've actually got an enormous amount of work underway in that space at the moment, particularly in the anti-money laundering space. We have 3 pieces of legislation in the House at the moment, and a fourth one still in drafting. And all of that is intended to bring our AML regime into a much stronger place, a much more robust place. It's actually better accepted by the participants who use it across industry, and all participants bring much more coherence to the way that regime works. We're moving to a single supervisor from having supervision in 3 different places at the moment. We're bringing to a much more explicit accounting for risk, and therefore a more proportionate set of responses to that. So we will put less onerous demands on children wanting to open their first bank account, but be able to come down much more vigorously and rigorously on those business interests or financial interests that are moving larger sums of money. That's a big piece of work program. It's across a whole range of different agencies and a big part of the policy function that we've got in the ministry. You can go beyond and further than that. There was the OECD report. I think it came back with 60 recommendations for the country to collectively respond to in relation to corruption. We're doing a report back on that by the end of this year. Hold the mic. Very sensitive at least. Sorry, my apologies. Just wave the back if you can't hear me, and that's better. The OECD has done a set of recommendations, 60 odd. We are we're coordinating and reporting back on how a range of agencies, ourselves, but police and SFO and others, are all responding to that. So there's a big amount of work that specifically in the financial and the corruption space. Beyond that, I think there is the work of agencies that we have a part of. The PSC has a lead on, and there's a more broader approach to combating corruption. Part of the question is what might we need to do next, and just very briefly on that, I think there are always issues around how do we actually link up and coordinate and make the most of the collective action that we're doing. So in the AML space, we will have a strategy. I'm not one of those people who is scornful of strategies. I think they are important things for being able to coordinate and connect activity, and if you have a good one, you will collectively achieve much more. We are having a lot of discussions, including in the justice sector, about whether we can bring more coordinated activity related to that. There is work in how we share information across entities. There is work in what transparency we bring, and there are some areas that are well known where we still have some gaps, such as beneficial trusts and the like. So there is still active policy work in that space. And to make sure I don't surpass my 5 minutes, I would say actually the challenge here is to keep seeing that big picture and to keep moving it forward in a lot of different agencies, a lot of different areas, and to make the most of the resources that we have to deploy in this space. Like all bits of government, the people that are working on this are constrained by resources, and so we have to be able to really identify where we prioritise and how we might move things forward.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Unfortunately, I have just been advised that Richard Chambers has been asked to do another interview, and I'm sure he'll appreciate that at this moment his obligation is to communicate to the wider public of New Zealand, and so that's taking priority, regrettable though it is. Okay, so Karen, next question. And remember, pretend you're Celine Dion and and hold that mic. That's probably why you had trouble, Andrew. Okay, so Transparency International New Zealand's 2024 report and one of the reports from the Ministerial Advisory Group on transnational organisational crime recommended more strategic leadership on corruption across public and private sectors. So what are the implications of that in terms of strategy and leadership in your area of responsibility?
Thank you, Debbie. Well, yes, I absolutely agree with that recommendation. So the SFO, as you probably know, we're primarily a law enforcement agency, but recognising that need for strategic leadership and perhaps more of a system impact role, we are now involved in the prevention side of things through our Counter Fraud Centre, and they work across central government and local government agencies to build their resilience to essentially harden themselves as a target against fraud, but also including corruption. And actually an initiative we're doing right now, we're in the throes of right now, this is led by the SFO together with police and the Public Service Commission. We have an anti-corruption task force, and we recently launched a pilot program. In fact, it was launched by Ministers Mark Mitchell and Judith Collins just in July this year, to take a short, sharp look at building a picture of what our current state of play is across the public sector, of where our risks in fraud and corruption, but in particular corruption, that insider threat is. And that's something that hasn't been done before in New Zealand. So it's an ambitious time frame. It's 6 months, and as I said, we kicked it off in July. So we're in the tail end of that now. What we are doing in this pilot program is we selected 6 agencies within the public sector, and we try to get a good spread of different sizes, large ones, small ones, Crown Entity, Government Department, those that are responsible for appropriating significant amounts of funds to the public. We also had law enforcement in there because we know that they are a particular target for organised crime groups when it comes to corruption to access and be able to do their business. So we picked 6, and which is obviously just a small fraction of what's out there, and took a bit of a deep dive into, well, what are your current systems and controls when it comes to detection? So that's picking it up, reporting it, dealing with fraud and corruption issues, prevention, stopping it from happening in the first place, but also looking at, well, what are your incidents of fraud and corruption just in the last 12 months, and also during the collection period, it was only 3 months, any live cases of just the insider threat, what was identified within just those 6 agencies. So that was the idea of just getting that snapshot so that we can better have an understanding of how to tackle it. And we rolled out a methodology which we adopted from Australia and the UK and tailored it to New Zealand. We're in the process now, we've finished the collection phase, done the analytics. We're in the process now to publish a report before the end of this year with our findings. So I don't want to jump the gun and talk about those findings. I'm very much looking forward to be able to talk about that more when that is available. But what I can say is that, well, first of all, there were some informative findings. So that methodology was able to, it's not just a tick box exercise, it was able to really gain some insights. And secondly, this will be of no surprise to anyone going to your earlier point, there are some real advantages in taking that system-wide approach rather than leaving it to individual agencies to do the best that they can in isolation, which they are. So looking forward to talking about that more, but that's just an example of the SFO taking on that strategic leadership role.
Thank you very much. Now, I've got a question that was going to be directed to Richard, and I'm just wondering whether you, Karen, or potentially you, Andrew, might be able to offer some insights into it. It was specifically meant for the police, but the question is, the recent threat assessment by the New Zealand Financial Intelligence Unit highlights sectors that are particularly vulnerable to corrupt practices. So what more needs to be done to halt the influence of organised crime and corruption in these sectors, in relating to those specific sectors? Now, I know that's a wild card because you weren't asked to answer that one, but if you have any thoughts, we'd welcome your thoughts.
Have a go.
Go first and I'll add to it.
Look, I'm not the enforcement arm, and I won't bring the specific analysis that might identify how you would move in relation to those sectors. So I think the key point that I would make is actually the importance of linking up. It is about identifying different information sources, having an ability to draw on different sources of evidence, to be careful and to bring a risk approach to people that it might be exposed or more likely to find themselves in the way of either pressure or temptation, and therefore act in that sort of way. So I am retreating to the generalities, and I apologise for that, but I'm sure my colleague will be able to go a little deeper on that.
Again, retreating to generalities, just going back to the importance of intelligence and prevention is how we can actually, it's increasingly known now that trying to deal with it from an enforcement perspective is not going to be sufficient without looking at the front end of things as well to really beat the tide. So having the intelligence through the FIU is very helpful. That's something that we benefit from ourselves. But also, how do we use that intelligence from preventing this being coming into New Zealand or into those sectors in the first place, rather than then trying to catch it at the end of ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. And also agree with Andrew's point that a joined up approach is important, and so actually the SFO has been working very closely, and certainly in my 3 years I've seen a much closer alignment of understanding what each other's priorities are and benefiting from the intelligence that the FIU collects within their BAU, and they understand what's going to be of interest and what is permissible to be shared with other organisations such as the SFO within what they see.
Thank you very much for stepping into the breach on that one. I'll give you a little break while I ask Philippa. Undue influence over political decision-making and public policy have been a top issue this year, and it's likely to continue to be as we head into the election year. What is the problem, and what can be done to mitigate it?
Thank you, Debbie. I just want to start my thing with a bit of a declaration of conflict of interest. I am going to talk about lobbying, but I engage in lobbying activity myself on an unpaid basis. I do gun control advocacy, and I was in the news yesterday for better reasons than some of my other panellists. And that's actually a different kind of story about ultimately the government making a decision that aligns with the public interest and public opinion. So this isn't all bad news. But I think this isn't just an issue of the last year. I think perhaps there's more public awareness of it, but it's something that has been building in New Zealand's political system for a while now. We're quite under-regulated on both lobbying and political donations, and there are lots of opportunities out there for sort of more entrepreneurial people to take advantage of that and to change systems in their favour if they know how to work the system. So, and this is not just a problem of present government, it's previous governments too, and there are quite a few dimensions to the problem. One is people making donations to political parties in return for particular policies. We've seen prosecutions not necessarily successful over these issues, but there's certainly a strong perception of pay-to-play politics. So if you make the right donation, the right amount to a political party, you'll get the policy that you want. This is often manifested in decisions that seem to go against all the evidence, against popular opinion. I could talk about cameras on boats or tobacco taxation, the general anti-smoking laws. And so pay-to-play politics is one of them. The other is the influence of lobbyists, and we're talking here not people like me who kind of, beg ministers to meet them, but rather people who, very often it's a revolving door, will be people who have worked as ministers themselves or in ministerial offices. They leave the job and the next week they're back in the beehive lobbying their former colleagues. And these are people who have access that ordinary mortals don't have. They have the minister's phone number, they're texting them, they're, getting, their OIAs have come out of, the requests to make changes to legislation, which then seem to be made. The problem with many of these things is there's not necessarily a sort of direct causal link. Often it's just a kind of association. It's hard to say how people are influenced when they make decisions. Most politicians will tell you that, they listen to all sides and then they kind of weigh up their choices and they're not particularly influenced by lobbying. We know from various studies of psychology, for example, doctors who prescribe medicine, if they've just been to a conference sponsored by a particular pharmaceutical company, they will be prescribing more of that drug in the next few weeks. So people are more susceptible to influence than they believe. And I think there's a growing perception and recognition of these problems. I think people are complaining more about the economy being rigged against them, manifests to an environmental issues. For example, most of the fast track projects are being promoted by people who've also made quite substantial political donations. And so that there's, and it ultimately it kind of degrades trust in the system. So opinion polls show that people believe that about 60-70% of people agree with the statement that the economy is rigged in favour of the rich and powerful. And New Zealand's also been sliding down the corruption rankings, as we all know. But these are not insoluble problems, they just require political will. Almost every other country out there regulates lobbying, requires various kinds of transparency so that we know who's lobbying. They have to register their contacts, they have to abide by various ethical codes. Political donations are generally much more tightly regulated than they are here in New Zealand. There are lots of solutions on the table. We've been talking about them for a long time, and really it's just a matter of some political will to change those things. And perhaps as behaviour becomes more egregious, there'll be stronger, genuine kind of public concern about these issues and more of a mandate for change.
Thank you, Philippa. There's another one for Andrew relating to the rule of law. With the pullback of the US on corporate transparency and recognition of higher and international courts, what are the risks to the global rule of law?
I won't obviously provide any direct commentary on the US, but I will make some pretty strong statements about the importance of the rule of law and the importance of the rule of law in an international context. It's particularly important for a small country like New Zealand that bobs around, without power on our side to enforce our will and achieve our goals and objectives. We rely on there being a lawful and if not level, at least negotiable and manageable playing field where we can, sell our goods to the world and engage in all the things that we need to engage in as a country. I think there's no doubt that a lot of those institutions are under strain or threat or pressure at the moment from a range of sources. And it's incredibly worrying, I think, for a country like New Zealand that's the world that we're facing. We're a small voice in pushing against that, and I think all our political parties do articulate New Zealand's position well in pushing against or standing up for the rule of law in the international space. I think one of the things we sometimes quite usefully do is lean in to actually be critical of some of those institutions because to some extent they are themselves makers of some of the troubles they face. The UN is a flawed institution in many ways, even though it's the best flawed institution we have that plays that sort of role. And so for countries like New Zealand to be quite active on the reforming side, there is a group of countries that we're part of, I think, working in the context of the UN at the moment to encourage it to be a bit more agile and responsive and able to deal with some of the issues that it faces. So my answer is quite a short one, really. The rule of law internationally is disproportionately important for New Zealand, I think, compared to other countries. Why? Because we don't have the backing of a whole lot of power that can enforce our will. We need to do all we can, therefore, to strengthen those institutions, because that is the sort of place that we can best find a path to prosperity, which is obviously about trade and engagement with the world.
Great, thank you. Now, another one for you, Karen. You're getting a bit of a workout tonight. The OECD assessment report recommended a more targeted focus on capturing foreign bribery, including more collaboration between enforcement agencies and the business sector. Now, you've talked about the need for interagency collaboration, but not so much in relation to the business sector. What do you see as the major threats to New Zealand if our agencies cannot take up this challenge fully?
Yes, so foreign bribery is notoriously difficult to detect and often relies on whistleblowers, insiders, to stick their neck out and give a tip-off. So, as identified in that report, there is perhaps insufficient awareness and understanding of what even foreign bribery is, let alone what to look for and then what to do once you find it. So, in response to that, just in May this year, we launched a national awareness campaign on foreign bribery, which, to your point around joining up with the business sector, it was launched with the backing of our Minister Mark Mitchell, but also with the support of Business New Zealand and Deloitte, recognising that the commercial sector is a key partner and a key stakeholder, frankly, in terms of reaping the benefits or having to grapple with the disadvantages of not dealing with it. And that campaign's twofold. So the first part is just the awareness. So the advertisements on your standard media publications, but also some targeted media, whether it's exporters or diaspora communities, those who are involved in export and trade. So that's the first part of it, is just quite an eye-catching ad. What are the red flags to look for with foreign bribery? What is it? Click on it. Takes it to a portal on our website, which is the second part of this campaign, which is the important part when it comes to relying on whistleblowers. This is a new platform we're rolling out. It's end-to-end encrypted, so that if somebody wants to provide a fully anonymous report, they can do so, but also have the advantage of being able to communicate back and forth with our investigators. So sometimes you might get a great tip and you really want to follow up an anonymous tip, but you can't ask any follow-up questions, so it must end there. And that's for those who may not even feel comfortable with the whistleblower legislation protections and think, I don't even want the law enforcement agency to know who I am because the risk is so high to me. So this platform we're utilising, it's accessible in multiple languages. I want to say something like 16 different languages, including Pacific region languages, and it's quite, and we'll use automated translation so you can correspond back and forth even if you're not speaking the same language, and we'll do neat things like they can even upload documents, but the platform will automatically strip the metadata out of it so we don't even inadvertently find out who they are. So that's twofold. We kicked that off in May, and it's just recognising that we do need to step up collectively the problem around detection. So going to your question around, well, what are the threats? As I say, sometimes it's quite difficult to understand what foreign bribery is and what are the threats if we let this harm take hold in New Zealand. The obvious ones are New Zealand's reputation as an ethical and attractive place to invest and do business, but also the reputation of our New Zealand companies, because there is quite serious corporate liability that attaches to our foreign bribery offences. And so you could be liable as a corporate if your employee engages in foreign bribery. You may not even necessarily know about it. So, for instance, they're out there trying to access a new market and they think, oh, well, this is the way to pave the way. And in those circumstances, the onus of proof can actually flip. So the corporate has to prove, oh, no, but I took reasonable steps to prevent it. So that could be quite damaging reputation-wise to our New Zealand companies. And then ultimately, of course, it's all the market distortion issues if you allow this to occur. So it impacts on fair competition, market distortion, loss of investor confidence and such like. There is also the organised crime angle as well, because we know that corruption is one of the key enablers for especially transnational organised crime groups to gain access to New Zealand and do their business here. So these are quite real threats that are there, and so this campaign that we're rolling out, and I encourage everybody to take a look and be our partners in that, is a step in the right direction to raise that awareness.
Thank you. That was a very comprehensive answer. And the next question was really about what you and the New Zealand Police were seeing through your joint investigations, and what policies and practices need to change to adapt to that. As I say, Richard's not here to share that answer. If you just want to give a quick response to that, thank you.
Well, the obvious one is just the rapid movement of funds, including through crypto assets. And also, it's just generally the world's getting smaller, and so we're also seeing persons of interest fleeing the jurisdiction, or perhaps not even coming into this jurisdiction and being able to utilise technology to victimise New Zealanders. So what needs to happen is that being able to reach in and perhaps collect evidence from overseas jurisdictions, or trace funds and bring it back to New Zealand, or try to trace some of these perpetrators who've fled, to locate them, arrest them, and perhaps even extradite them back to New Zealand. This is something that needs to become more BAU and something that we can do more seamlessly, and that requires good engagement with your local agencies, so police and SFO, for instance, but also those overseas authorities as well, because you rely on them to, it's all well and good to have a blue notice issued or a silver notice issued, but you rely on those overseas jurisdictions to locate the individual and then arrest them on your behalf. Can I give a recent example, actually, just to kind of make it slightly less dry, of an example of this that we had to encounter? So we had a case where a public servant, quite a senior public servant, she engaged in about $2 million worth of corruption, and she was, her and her husband actually, and she was 8 months pregnant. She was gainfully employed in yet another public service agency at the time we were investigating, and we executed a search warrant. And that's the time when that's the cat's out of the bag, right? When you execute the search warrant, the person of interest knows I'm being investigated. Now, as I said, they had been there for some time, 8 months pregnant, gainfully employed, not necessarily all the natural indicia of flight risk, but within 3 days of us executing that search warrant, this couple purchased one-way business class tickets to India, carrying 80 kilograms of luggage, so there's a bit of a giveaway. It's not going to be a short trip, and immediately put all of their New Zealand assets, property on the market, and withdrew $800,000 worth of cash from their bank accounts. Fraud does pay sometimes, and was able to disperse those funds or launder those funds into 7 different Indian bank accounts, all within 3 days of us executing the search warrant. So, as you can imagine, we had to pivot and rethink what we were, our investigation plan. So we worked very closely with the police's asset recovery unit to not only freeze the property in New Zealand, but also more challengingly to try and locate and trace where the cash had gone into these Indian bank accounts, and also work with local authorities to freeze those funds. So the SFO, we don't have asset recovery powers ourselves, so we necessarily need to engage with police to do that. But then the additional complexity of having to work with the Indian authorities was challenging. But there's a good news story. We were able to do that and was able to locate all of that. And the interesting thing was that those 2 individuals then voluntarily returned to New Zealand after we charged them to face the charges. Now, I'm not sure if that was what they were planning to do when they left with the 80 kilograms of luggage, but when you freeze everything that they own, and perhaps the life that one might have envisioned was crumbling away because now you're not able to fund it, it became a decision as to whether they're better off coming back to New Zealand to face the charges so that they could at least have some prospect of getting some of those assets back. So that's what they did, and it's just an example of that was a much more quick and cost-effective way of getting those persons of interest back than an extradition application. I don't know if anyone's gone through that, but that can be quite complex and resource intensive. So just an example of the importance of being able to work with your agents, your other agencies, overseas authorities really quickly to get some of those outcomes. And another example, sorry, I'm just eating up time, but I'm using Richard's time, so I think I get twice as much time. Another example, a recent example, I have to be careful here for the media because there are suppression orders in place, but an individual essentially fled the jurisdiction just before trial and to quite a far away country. And again, this was relying on, so again, we had to go into full action as to extradition, where this person was. And I see my colleague, the Solicitor General there, where I think there was an urgent phone call, maybe on the day of your Christmas party, that I had to make. That because for those of you who might not know, the Attorney General's consent is required for many of these cross-border issues, extradition, mutual legal assistance, and such like. And if there were any delays in that process, it would have really held us up. But luckily we received seamless service and were able to be well coordinated, filed that urgent application, and ultimately the individual we worked very closely also with the Overseas Authority. They were located, which is no easy task, detained, and while that person was being detained, probably thought about whether or not they wished to fight extradition, and ultimately the individual decided to voluntarily return to New Zealand, given that they were obviously detained while they were fighting extradition. And when I say voluntarily, I mean with 3 police escorts and taken straight to the courthouse. So again, just a couple of recent examples of how we have to get used to this happening, and we have to work much more seamlessly with our colleagues across the globe to adapt. We can't just say, well, they've left, and so, oh, well, then that's in the too hard basket. And I have to say that our relationship with the Police's Asset Recovery Unit and also Crown Law's team has been just going from strength to strength in recognition of the importance of being able to do this well.
Well, that's some fascinating examples there, so thank you for that. That really does give some life to what you're talking about. We'll conclude with Philippa. What more can civil society do to support transparency and integrity in the public and private sectors in New Zealand? Not a small question.
I did give this one some thought, and for some reason the analogy of climate change came to mind, and there isn't really an equivalent of kind of like eat less meat and fly less for individuals, because these are really systemic issues and they require systemic solutions. So there is, for the average person, there is very little that you can actually do as an atomized individual. What's really important is actually coming together and building, coalitions and groups of people who are interested in these issues and who can advocate for them and sort of amplify voices. So, for those listening at home, if you're not already a member of Transparency International, please sign up. There are a few other organisations that have become quite interested, particularly in the issues of political financing and lobbying. So Transparency International has formed a coalition with Health Coalition Aotearoa and the Helen Clark Foundation, who have both come to these issues from different perspectives. Health Coalition obviously concerned about impacts on health. Helen Clark Foundation sort of concerned about kind of long-term impacts on the future of New Zealand, both for the economy and the environment. So it is really important to come together into civil society groups. We can have an influence. It's not all doom and gloom. The kind of the forces of evil don't win every time. And I think it is also really important that we have solutions ready for politicians. And I've been thinking recently that sometimes perhaps we need to really work those solutions up to ever greater levels of detail, so that when the problem crops up and there's whatever the crisis it is and somebody wants to respond to it, you can kind of go, well, here's one that we prepared earlier and it's all ready to go, rather than having to start a policy process, which just inevitably takes a certain amount of time. And I suppose there are other things, and I'm sort of talking about the average person. The people in this room and many of the members are not the average person, and wherever you are, many of you will be in positions where you can advocate for change in the system, for improved laws, for improved policy, for improved regulatory cooperation. So part of it is just a kind of being committed to the kaupapa of transparency and anti-corruption, and just pushing that wherever you can and in whatever way is available to you. And if you don't have any sort of extra influence or power, joining together with other people is the way to go.
Right, thank you, Philippa. Now, we've eaten a little bit into our questions from the floor time. We do need to conclude that by 6:05, so we now got a quarter of an hour to do it. We have a roving mic, and unfortunately it is only people in the room. We can't take online questions. So does anybody have a question for the panellists? Okay, one person over here. And please state your name and then your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan Boston, Victoria University. First of all, thanks to the panellists for your excellent answers to some brilliant questions. As I listened to Karen, it seemed to me a key message is follow the money and try and get it back if you can. And I wondered in the context, Philippa, of your comments, but also the work you've done previously about electoral finance, we have no constraint on the amount of money any individual can give to a political party. That is unlike the situation in many other countries. In Canada, for example, the limit is under $2,000 Canadian. And I wondered if I could just ask all three of you, given the evidence internationally, increasingly, of the misuse of party funding and the increasing risks of corruption in a world of vast increases in inequality, whether you think we should have a clear monetary limit on donations to political parties, and if so, where would you set that limit?
I'll have a go and go first. I have perhaps greater freedom to express my views than the other panellists. I think there's a very strong case for limiting donations. I mean, because else you end up with a grossly unequal political system where we might nominally all have one vote, but ultimately it's the people with the most money who are setting the agenda and influencing policy. And all the international evidence suggests that you end up with massive economic distortions if you have a corrupt system, because if you have a system that is politically corrupt, where the influence and the policy and the resources of the state go towards the influential and well-connected. I'm not talking sort of about fraud and crime. Sort of fraud and just kind of straight up theft forms of corruption. So we risk tilting our entire economy towards people who are good at lobbying and are good at playing the game, rather than people who have genuinely good economic ideas and businesses that will be successful on their own 2 feet. So I think it's very important to have limits on donations. We can talk numbers. It's probably sort of in the $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 level. I think also that it should be limited only to individual human beings who are allowed to donate. I don't think businesses should be allowed to donate. And we also need much better reporting that's much closer to real time, because at the moment you go into an election and you actually have no idea who's funding it. The returns only come out after you've voted. So the system is quite bizarre. There's all kinds of shenanigans that go on because each offence hasn't been perfectly specified. And we need some general kind of anti-avoidance measures. Poor Karen here has probably worn the scars of, what looked to everybody like incredibly corrupt behaviour, where a political party seemed to just be taking cash from people and promising very specific political favours. But because of the way it was structured, the prosecution wasn't successful. So I think we do have some very big problems in that area in New Zealand, and we absolutely need to remedy it. There's also the issue of third-party funding. So you can just spend unlimited amounts of money on advocating on a particular issue around an election. In the US they call them political action committees, PACs and super PACs, and they're, they've had a whole flood of money unleashed by their Supreme Court after the Citizens United, and has had some quite big influence on particular elections. In New Zealand, it's completely unregulated, and the only limit here on that kind of activity is just that, people in New Zealand are not generally particularly wealthy, and the stakes are perhaps not as high, but it's more kind of good luck than good management. So absolutely think that's an area for reform. I'll let you guys chip in if you want.
I'll probably give you a slightly more guarded response than you might have been hoping for, Jonathan. I think it's clearly an issue that actually is really important to have a public debate about. There are lots of different arguments for how donations work, from those who would argue that the state should fund entirely, and those who would argue that that would be an anathema to really encouraging political parties to be responsive and to kind of to earn their support through being good proponents of their particular political proposals. So without sort of laying my penny down on the various threads through all of those things, I would encourage you and others to keep talking about it, because there are different perspectives and actually you want them all out and heard. At a principled level, I think transparency is really important. And there are different ways of achieving transparency, but I would absolutely think that sunlight is part of how you best deal with the sorts of issues that arise here. I think there are arguments to be made for some caps and for some limits, simply because, and that's a reflection as much as some of the negative things you see when you get a really disproportionate and kind of out of kilter level of political donation occurring. But here I am in the refuge of the public servant. It's very complicated, Jonathan, and I think enabling as much of a conversation to happen with discussion around it and looking at different proposals, because it's actually, there's lots of subtle arguments for all the different things, the levers you can pull in this space. Karen.
I'll also equally frustratingly not directly answer your question, but absolutely whatever the right policy settings are for New Zealand, which, as Andrew said, is a good conversation to have, just from our perspective, certainly having the framework, the legal framework to support that, and so to reduce the ability for loopholes or people to get around it is always a good idea, to be able to reinforce whatever the intention behind the policy settings are. So in that vein, bringing up an old wound, the cases that the SFO took on in relation to political donations, to Andrew's point, really did shine a light on this particular issue, which I would argue it wasn't particularly discussed in New Zealand prior to these cases coming forward, and highlighted the importance of transparency if we're going to have a free democratic process, and then also on the back of it resulted in some reform to our electoral laws. So from our perspective, ensuring that our framework is fit for purpose to support whatever policy settings are right for New Zealand is going to be a good idea.
Thank you. We've got a question at the back there and then another one at the front, and then I think, we'll have to make these ones short and succinct, please.
Good evening. My name's Andrew Eccleston. I'm the Deputy Chair of the New Zealand Council for Civil Liberties. In the last 24 hours, ministers have repeatedly referred to a few bad apples in police leadership. Is it not time to recognise that the barrel holding these apples is part of the problem? And how should the systemic culture issues be tackled?
Do we actually have anybody here that can...
Look, I'm part of what we do in the Ministry of Justice is we support the Independent Police Conduct Authority. So the IPCA is one of the Crown entities, and obviously their report sets out a lot of very thoughtful recommendations. Government has said that it will accept those recommendations. We're doing the Ministry of Justice will be the lead policy agency making sense of that. I think it's really important that we do tackle in quite a deep way the issues that have the IPCA has talked about, and if that goes to addressing broader cultural issues, I think that would be a good thing. That certainly would be the a sense of the IPCA report.
Unless either of you two want to comment, I'll take the next. Sorry, okay, I've got one up the front.
And I think institutional change is possible. I'd contrast the Defence Force that had a lot of issues with kind of bullying and sexual harassment, and I think the leadership have taken those issues very seriously, and I think there has been culture change, and I think it is possible. It's just about kind of will from the top.
There's a question up the front here. Just wait for the mic, please.
Kia ora. A very informative session. Thank you so much. Pancha Narayanan from Multicultural New Zealand. Right. I don't know if the question that I have got two parts, but I'm not sure if they are related. On one side, we advocate for immigrants, and 1 in 3 New Zealanders are born overseas. But more and more, we are hearing stories like things that happen from countries that we come from. It's more closer to the ground. RTO with driver's license, and there was some bribery happening in, I'm not surprised that it was in Auckland. But are we as a country still naive of these things? You know, we are seeing these things emerging in areas traditionally as New Zealand we are not accustomed to. What is your awareness, and what are you doing about it?
I can answer your question in just general terms, that culture is important when it comes to integrity, what we think that looks like, what's acceptable in any country. And in a multicultural environment, you're going to have different standards, different norms, and it's different, more diversity of thought. So in a general sense, when New Zealand is becoming increasingly multicultural, and we see that in other settings as well, it's not just in terms of integrity and corruption, but it's in a whole lot of other areas where there may be divergence of values and things that you're not used to seeing, then that is going to be a factor that I think New Zealand needs to be aware of. It's one of the things that makes us unique and special and good and strong, as you say, in a lot of ways, but it comes with the other side of the coin when it, in all, like with other forms of immigration, it comes with complexities, and it comes with a lot of strengthening advantages to any country. So I think you're right to consider that it is relevant when we're considering how does that impact on the threat environment for New Zealand.
As at least one migrant on the panel, I think this is quite an important thing to consider, the changing face of New Zealand when we do think about transparency, because migrants come to New Zealand from very different backgrounds and very different ideas of what government is. Even their levels of fear and trust will be quite different to sort of the native-born population. I think it's really important to acknowledge that New Zealand is changing, and many of our institutions actually rely on norms and unwritten rules rather than actually having codified things. And many of the problems that we see, particularly in the realm of activities like lobbying and political party financing, the fact that most of this relies on norms. Conflicts of interest, another area that's got far too much norm and not enough hard law. And I think what it speaks to is the need to actually codify, have more hard law rather than just relying on cultural norms. And it's easier to kind of push the culture in a certain direction if the law is actually speaking to that and pushing it in that direction as well. So for me, I think it speaks to the need to codify more things. Yeah.
And I might bring my answer right round to where I started. You know, if the challenge is strengthening people's trust in the law, How do we ensure that all of the institutional settings are set up to enable that? How do we ensure that the law is understood by all of the different groups in all the different parts of New Zealand, so that ignorance or a confusion of a norm or whatever it is isn't an excuse or doesn't lead people down a path? And I think that the key point, and I think is at the heart of your question, is that we have to be alert to our whole environment that we live in, to the whole rich diversity of the community that we have, and we have to think of the whole system. That we need to be thinking about how do you build the respect and the trust in political institutions, in the courts, in the core bit of underpinning infrastructure that is the law, and both as expressed in statute and through the common law, and all of that we need to be alert to the different challenges that are coming at it. And I think the value in your question is it highlights a particular source of that challenge, and really important for us to be always alert and responsive to those sorts of things. So thank you for that.
Kia ora. Well, that's all we've got time for, unfortunately, from the floor, although I'm hoping you can stay afterwards to answer some questions over some drinks and nibbles. So first of all, I would just like to thank the panels, give you a chance to give some final comments before I thank you. So just 2 minutes, 3 minutes each, please, if you could.
I think I just made my final comment. It's the importance of and all we do is look to how we strengthen people's trust in the law.
I think a lot of New Zealand has rested on its laurels for too long on these corruption issues. I think we have been sliding down the rankings. I think that will accelerate. And I think we need a lot of action, and there are a lot of solutions just sitting on the table waiting to be implemented. I would really like to see the next government, whatever complexion it is. I've tried lobbying the current one. They weren't particularly, well, they said they have other priorities that were more important, but really like to see the next government, whatever complexion it is, implementing a lot of those recommendations. They're not particularly hard. They're proposals that have been around for a long time, and some law reform would really go a long way to helping to halt that slide.
So for me, a plug. Next week, I think, is Fraud Awareness Week, if I'm not mistaken. And our theme that our Counter Fraud Centre, so we're rolling out a bunch of webinars, which promise you won't be dry. There'll be case studies and there'll be good stuff in there, so encourage you to check it out. Our theme is that this, as we've talked about, is a team effort if we're going to tackle this, so don't sit on the sidelines. So I'm really encouraged. I'm starting to see some of the familiar same faces at some of these events, so I can see that we've got people right across the board that are interested in being part of that team. So just a plug, come check us out.
Right. Well, I'd just like to, first of all, offer my heartfelt thanks to the panellists for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your insights, and some interesting examples with us. We're deeply honoured to have you here, and we're just really pleased that you were able to make the time to attend our event and share with our audience. So I'd like everybody to join with me in thanking them very much. I have Philippa, it's family holdback, but I have got 3 now, seeing as Richard's not here. So here's a copy of our annual report. I know, no expense spared. Now we're going to take a break to invite you to mingle and have some more refreshments. Noting that the AGM will start directly at 6:45, 6:45. So meanwhile, you're welcome to mingle and perhaps ask our esteemed panellists some more questions over a drink and a nibble. Thank you.